wanted to start the conversation, at least in the first half, by talking about what's going on in terms of American imperialism, American empire on its last fucking stand, with our most valuable, most important ally, the only moral country in the world, the only democracy in the world with the most moral military, Israel. As we're having this conversation, Israel obviously has expanded its conflict to Lebanon beyond what it was already doing in this supposed tit for tat de-escalation through escalation method that they were applying, where they were responsible for 80% of the fucking munitions being deployed in the the Lebanese Israeli border skirmishes that were taking place. They obviously did an act of terror that even the likes of Leon Panetta considered to be an act of terror. And I feel like when you got, it's like Osama bin Laden being like, that's terror, dog. You know what I mean? It's like, like you are the guy, right? Like he knows what terror is, right? If he's saying it's terror, I'm going to go along with what he's saying. Or maybe he's woke. I don't know. And anti-Semitic. Who knows? So after that, and the broad positive reception from Western media and Western officials in general, Israel was like, oh, hell yeah, let's keep doing what we're doing. It doesn't seem like anyone's telling us don't do it. And now they are resorting to carpet bombing southern Lebanon and doing the exact same Hamas, anti-Hamas propaganda that they applied, but this time they just changed what comes after the from Hamas to Hezbollah in Lebanon. I wanted to hear your guys' analysis on that as the foremost experts on American imperialism. I know you had a conversation with the Chapo boys on it as well. It's okay if you repeat some of those talking points. It's all good. But how are you guys enjoying the show with Anthony Blinken defending Israel unconditionally?
How could it possibly be going better? Is what I ask myself every day. No, I mean, I think that the only thing that you left out is that it now seems that the headlines in Reuters and the Associated Press are indications are that Israel is escalating its air attacks into a ground invasion. They're calling up reserve battalions. It still may not happen. It still might. It can go either way still, but it's not trending in a good direction. At least, in the sense that it is just escalating. But Israel has never really successfully invaded Lebanon without getting a bloody nose. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, 2006 was the last time, right? And that was a huge. I mean, it was humiliating.
Oh, that was a big bad.
You have to imagine that they're as unrestrained as they appear right now. They're going to have a much harder time going up against Hezbollah than they have against Hamas and the piece of territory that they have so much control over. This would be a different story, I think. Now, whether or not they are unhinged enough at this point to consider that, I defer to you guys.
Yeah, looking at what Hasan's putting up on the screen.
Oh yeah, no, I was just showcasing the words Western media use to avoid saying ground invasion, use of ground troops, ground offensive, ground maneuver.
I will say, I think ground offensive is pretty fine. I think that is more or less what an invasion like it's offensive. It's not mincing there. I think the FT gets a pass from me on that one, but the rest of them can go to hell.
The FT's done pretty good coverage on this stuff. I think from early October in general, much better than Wall Street Journal, which is in the tank and has routinely spread misinformation. As a matter of fact, misinformation that, like, if I recall correctly, the American State Department had to come out and clarify in a brief act of unity from both the U.S. State Department, the Israeli government, the Israeli intelligence services, and even Iran. If you remember when they were like, they all had to be like, yeah, we didn't know October 7 was happening. Like, everybody had to be like, yeah, Iran did not play a role in October 7 beyond like regular logistical support and training to like militants.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is now, I think, a quality of I guess like the media at this stage of it is kind of it's sort of hard, I think, to communicate like why stuff is going on without just sort of like I've not read a story yet in a mainstream paper that doesn't like really kind of foreground that like Israel is choosing to escalate. Like the facts of this situation are a lot harder to propagandize around, I think, than like the post October 7th stuff was. Like rallying around the flag in this situation is like much more tortured and much less effective when Israel's going to war with like a somewhat neutral country, a neutral country, true, I mean, but is now like yeah is somehow thinks it can have that front and the other one. It all doesn't really add up to me, truthfully, as a coherent set of operations.
Yeah. So the question I have, I guess, that many people also have, and I want to hear a different perspective on this, is like, what the fuck is Israel thinking? Because as you also correctly pointed out, they've had an incredibly hard time dealing with an ascetic resistance force that is basically in captured territory, that is under permanent Israeli mass surveillance and occupation in Gaza. They can't deal with like 17 to like 20-year-olds wearing Adidas tracksuits, running up to their fucking $30 million Merkava tanks and lobbing grenades directly into it. How the fuck are they expected to deal with an enemy with a standing military that is combat trained, that is far better equipped, that is in an entirely sovereign state, that has geared up its defenses against this potential Israeli invasion since the last two times that they successfully were able to withstand Israeli invasion?
Noah has a lot more insight into the nitty gritty. I think we talked about this on Chapo the other day a
Oh,
bit.
are you just saying that because I'm Jewish, right?
Yeah, that's what I was insinuating.
Okay, I just wanted to be
Let me
clear.
just
Just wanted to be on the
get the
level
tropes
here.
out of the way.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I follow this stuff, but we sort of had a little back and forth the other day about wondering about this very question. I mean, I was sort of pointing out for my part that um, I think there's an obvious uh, problem at this point with saying that Israel is doing all of this as an obedient client state of the U.S. And only that. I don't think that the U.S. Has a particular interest, as we're seeing from every new hapless cable or dispatch that the State Department puts out, saying we don't think it would be particularly constructive for them to go into Lebanon. I don't think that's kayfabe. I, I think the U.S. is essentially handcuffed at this moment to a rogue state that it has shrinking influence with and has had shrinking influence with over the years as a so-called client-patron dynamic. Israel is operating unlike the empire, which wants goods to flow and commodities to ultimately go back and forth all over the world, which is why the Houthis piss us off so much because they've been blocking some of that. Israel has a totally different logic, I think, at this point, which is that of a lunatic state in which, as you put it, Noah, the other day, the inmates are kind of taking over the asylum, and the colder logic of past years, which isn't to justify any of Israel's policies, it was still a relatively cold and considered logic of how to occupy and exploit and ultimately probably starve out this place, the occupied territories. You had those Shin Bet guys, the sort of old guard that would say in the documentary, like the Gatekeepers, where they talk to a bunch of Shin Bet chiefs or former Shin Bet chiefs that say, "Yeah, we're basically fascists now. That's how it is. We'll see how that works out." I think now, as Noah can obviously speak to, who's followed the kind of he's got more of these stories that are in the news day in and day out. It seems like now this is an ethno state that has fully gone out of control and really has no choice in its own logic but to escalate, but to throw the war further on, and to, like other states that had a attack dog approach toward their idea of greater Germany or greater Serbia and now greater Israel, they have no choice but to expand. So that's to just outline a little bit the difference between what I can detect in Israel's calculus and the calculus of its benefactor, the United States. I don't know.
And
What do you think, Noah? I mean, we talked about this a
yeah,
couple days ago.
yeah. I mean, the only other thing I would really add to that, because I think you kind of hit all the major points. The only thing I would add is that there is something in, like a lot of what Israel and the Israeli leadership is doing is because of strong political incentives that are domestic in Israel. Much in the same way that when you were like, why did the American military or the American political leadership make such a puzzling decision in Iraq or Afghanistan at these various points? It's often because they're driven by domestic political considerations. And Israel is no different. And in this case, the Netanyahu government, since October 7th, they had a steep fall in popularity, but then they've only gradually gotten more popular since. And the way in which that kind of escalation has sort of nourished them, it's kind of bailed them out of dealing with the problems that people were initially, at first, blushed on October 7th, more aware of than at any point since. Because now, what like the war with Hezbollah kind of staves off is what in a group of the Israeli central bank, I forget what it's called, it may just be called that. An economist there recently published a report stating that, like, look, if you sort of buy the general line that they're going to try to wind down the general level of conflict over the next year, during that time or at the end of it, Israel is going to have to engage in a program of radical austerity, or there is going to be a financial crisis. In fact, the financial crisis may be unavoidable without some sort of massive stabilization. I think that, like, truthfully, I do think that there is the political appetite in the U.S. government to help bail out Israel down the line. However, like, when we are not, like, that's a political problem that these guys don't want to get to. And it satisfies this sort of Brendan laid out, like, what I would sort of think of are like the bigger ideological priors that they have that kind of soup them up and get them excited and sort of legitimate their unbelievably stupid and short-sighted decision to, escalate now possibly to the point of a ground invasion with Lebanon, something that, again, historically does not go well for Israel. And it's not because, like, they didn't hit, like, up, down, down, square, circle, triangle quick enough. It's like, it's not a battle, it's not a fight that favors them. Brennan, you're a little blurry.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm trying to come back. Here we go.
There he is. Beautiful face.
yeah. I think I was listening to the New York Times Daily report from that one, like Israeli surveillance reporter, like the Israeli national security reporter that they had on the Daily, that talked about like the increasing popularity that like the ultra nationalist far right elements within Israeli society have had over the past like 30 years. It was definitely a little bit of like, oh no, it's just like these guys are basically now running the country, and there is truth to that. The inmates are running the asylum, and I do routinely think about like the gravest threat to the Zionist operation being that all the academics and all the artists that make the shittiest EDM you've ever heard of inevitably leaving Israel because they just no longer consider Israel to be a truly secure nation. Like the veil of security was obviously damaged greatly in October 7. Israel retaliated in incredibly violent ways by conducting its genocidal affairs. But beyond that, ever since then, the Iron Dome has failed time and time again, including with Houthi loitering munitions and also a hypersonic missile coming directly from Ansar Allah. These are this constitutes a genuine threat to like normal Israeli society, where they can no longer operate under the veneer of like, we are a Western nation where nothing bad will happen to you and we can be as violent as we want to everyone without any sort of repercussions to normal Israeli society. Like, you could still go to the beach in Tel Aviv and party as we are conducting our genocide, mere miles away. And I think that constitutes a grave threat because it will inevitably turn Israel into a nation that is entirely comprised of messianic, inbred, ultra-Orthodox psychopaths with a nuclear arsenal and further push them away as a pariah state. Obviously, that is terrifying for the future of the world, right? But it's also terrifying for the Zionist project in general. And I think that's why a lot of these like Shin Bet guys regularly try to like speak out against that, because they also want the maintenance of the apartheid to continue to a certain degree that is manageable in a way that does not disrupt the regular order of business. And while, you know, they have recognized that they're slowly losing their grip on power, the thing that comes to mind, obviously, like the former Shin Bet official that told Benjamin Netanyahu, if you consistently, if you continue these attacks on the West Bank, like this is going to become an unmanageable situation. An October 7th style attack might happen. This was way before October 7th. And Benjamin Netanyahu's retaliation to that was, you're woke. You've been captured by woke interests. And and you know, that's what happens when you let a guy from Philadelphia be your fucking leader. But big L on that one for Israel.
Well, we talked about this the other day too. You know, with regard to America, there's a thesis from back in the day called the Yankee versus the Cowboy, and I think you could apply that analysis to Israel as much as anywhere else, including America, where you have divides in the ruling class. There are those Israelis in power who we were just describing, who want to maintain their hegemony in the area. Maybe someday they hope Israel could take over more of the land officially, but for now it's okay to maintain it. Similar to the American, during the Cold War and beyond, the American Eastern establishment who thought, let's keep Europe stable, let's run NATO, let's do containment, and we'll get there. Versus the frontier types, the Yahoos, the cowboys, who in the American example would be, your pro-Vietnam China lobby types who wanted to take the Cold War into Asia, where they thought it was really going to cook and pop off, not worry about Europe, who they viewed as a bunch of, snobbish leeches of America. And in Israel, the example would be exactly the crowd we've been talking about, the so-called inmates taking over the asylum, who want the frontier to keep going, the manifest destiny to keep going, not in a 50-year period, not in a 100-year period, but right now, today and tomorrow. And that's who, as Noah was pointing out, that's who's taking over. And that's not necessarily a good thing for their fellow Zionists, because it's short-sighted, it's unstrategic, and while it's horribly violent and a terrible thing for everyone else as well, it's ultimately kind of a death drive and suicidal. So the question will be, if they, exhaust themselves before they take everyone else out with them. I mean, you got to imagine, not to get too grim, but you've got to imagine the U.S., at some points are saying, let's say we do start to cut them off, are they going to start talking about tactical nukes or this or that? Or are they crazy enough to make that threat and then actually press the button? That's going to keep people up in the State Department in a way that is a bit of a hostage situation of its own. So I think that is the kind of dichotomy that we're seeing right now, as far as the different groups trying to direct Israel's destiny at the expense of everyone else.
Yeah. Also, to further prove the point that you're making, we saw this divergence within the State Department with those who want to maintain American hegemonic power status early on, with calls for restraint towards Israel because they knew what Israel was going to do, against those who were unconditional and undying Zionists themselves, who truly believe that like Israel must not be restrained and they should actually blow off a little bit of steam, or even, like you said, manifest destiny in the way that they wanted to. And that's why you saw like State Department officials resign. And that's why you are now getting reports from ProPublica about even fucking U.S. aid and other State Department agencies creating memos all the way back, I believe, in April, and sending it to Anthony Blinken to be like, hey, Israel is actually in direct contravention with American laws, the Leahy law to be exact.
No. We should be fair here. We should be really fair, because similar memos were drafted for when the State Department approved the arming of Saudi Arabia
Yes.
in their campaign against the Houthis.
Yes.
So, Hasan, Brendan, we cannot pick on the only Jewish state to get arms in contravention of war crimes statutes and laws.
Yes, and
Because
I
that would
was
be
of
wrong.
course,
That would
I
be
was
very
of course
wrong.
very much in support of the Saudi kingdom continuously.
I'm watching
getting-
your tropes. I'm
Yeah.
watching your tropes.
Thank you for keeping me honest. Yes,
Absolutely, man. It's fucking crazy out here.
okay. I'll do one.
You
I'll
never
do
know.
one
Like
back- I'll do
Jonathan
one back to
Greenblatt,
you.
just like that.
I'll do one back
You
at you. It seems quite Islamophobic that you are coming after the Muslim nation of Saudi Arabia. That's where Mecca is, okay? And Medina. You understand?
And Medina. And
Yeah.
Medina. Shit.
Not just Mecca,
Shit.
but Medina as well. And you coming after the Muslim nation is quite Islamophobic.
Can someone take a pot shot at Ireland or something so I can get in here and have an attended moment?
Oh, now the potato farmer speaks up. Oh boy.
Well,
Stop.
there you go. The Irish phobia is alive and well, folks. It's completely permissible. You could just say that and get away with it. You know, it's fucked up.
It is.
But okay, all jokes aside.
One thing I do want to add on the point of like the sort of like how Israel's getting more radical and like what is its interest or whatever. A lot of it is that like Israel is already like it has been on sort of like years of decline in the way that like a lot of the West has broadly. Income inequality has widened. The economic it's basically like there's like Poland is doing good, I guess, but like pretty much everyone else has been doing pretty bad. Although
That's a
America's
top secret
recovered.
in the world. I mean,
Yeah, right. Seriously, man. Like for next thing you know, we're going to be asking them to screw in our light bulbs. In any event, like this. So Israel is not like immune from like this secular change, like bad change in condition in the financial and economic health of the country, and it's also not really like it's quite clearly losing its edge as like an offensive military power. They can do a lot of this. They can blow up Hania. They can do the pager attack. They clearly are willing to do these things as well. But like there is like it's not just crazies pulling the trigger on those things.
Says
like,
that it has.
I think that the crazies are gaining currency because they are being led in from the center in a sense. I mean, like look, like the emergency powers essentially that Hitler had ready made for him when he assumed power were there because Gruning, had them, more or less had them as part of like like twilight of the Weimar government. I don't again like I don't want to be in the habit of making like 1-to-1 history of Nazi Germany, history of Israel comparisons, but like that one seems to me to be.
I mean,
Especially among many other points of comparison.
Yeah.
Well,
that's why it's
what
always
was the
funny
other?
when they. Or go ahead, Brendan. Sorry.
I was just gonna say. I mean, that's another way that you can look at like a dichotomy is that Israel has always done shenanigans like this, blowing up a bunch of people, assassinations of civilians. They've done that in the past. I mean, they spy on Americans, and the liberty and all of that. There's a long history of all this, but they've always been very their perception in the world, particularly within America, has allowed those rogue practices to be juxtaposed with a very well-run PR machine in which they run a tight ship and they have good message discipline and they know their way around messaging and public relations. And that whole side of it, which has allowed the rogue acts and the assassinations and wars and all that to have this sheen to them that Americans, as an important audience, swallow very easily. But now, I don't know what Noah, Hasan, you could maybe tell me, but I don't know what's happened. But they have lost that polished PR machine. They are now dealing every day with images and video, not only of politicians saying grotesque things and rape advocates being the Forrest Gumps that get to go on TV and be mascots essentially on talk shows and stuff like that, but also videos from the battlefield if you want to call it that, in which the soldiers are doing war crimes in plain view. I mean, that is not
Well, I'll
a
actually add
squeaky
to
clean image.
I'll add to that and then kick it to Hasan because I think there's like a question we can put to him there on that, which is that like, because I agree with Brendan, like, Abba Eban, who was sort of like the OG effective Anglo like language Israel diplomat of my parents' generation, who was very charming, had very very good for television and so on. He's like Elon Levy, pales in comparison to somebody like him and so on. um that is like a thing of the past. I think now that the reason that they don't give a shit about that sort of like deluge of imagery and the sort of like how horrible their advocates are now, the sort of loomerification of like all of like the Zionists or whatever, I think that it's because it's it follows like it fits like broad patterns of political polarization, along gender, along generational lines, especially class, etc. Like it's becoming, it's mapping onto, broadly speaking, like the left-right dichotomy. Not everything falls, like not all parts of it, but it does seem to me like it conforms to that like pretty epically. That said, Hasan, like it does seem though that like there are a bunch of influencers or people, um, like oh yeah, like that guy Ethan Klein, like he shared a screenshot of a screenshot of a screenshot of something I said, which I love when that happens. And like, but like he's like somebody who it's like, okay, clearly he has like an audience of like people on the internet or whatever, but he's also like a very big pro-Israel moron. And like clearly like there is like some like novel development in like how certain people are like effective pro-Israel advocates now, representing that viewpoint from like a younger generation, but like who are like achieving something even if they don't have the finesse of like earlier folks or whatever.
I don't think Ethan Klein's audience is as even remotely seemingly pro-Israel as he is. That's my assessment, which is why he's constantly duking it out with his own audience or with regular frequency on this issue. But as far as like what has changed, I think a couple things. Like obviously, a pivotal point was 2021 when a lot of the NGOs that I normally am somewhat critical of openly declared Israel to be an apartheid, which took away like a massive cynical deployment of anti-Semitism whenever you brought this thing up, right? Because you could be like, well, these are institutions that like are formative in the rule-based international order, and they are all also correctly calling Israel an apartheid regime. And I think ever since then, with also social media and the fact that people can like actually humanize Palestinians and directly hear from them, the dynamic has changed quite a bit because of that democratization of information spreading and not being completely captive to mainstream outlets that will repeat the State Department line unconditionally and vociferously. A lot of people have been able to make up their own minds about what they see as like truly a bloody and barbaric affair. I think that is also that plays a major role. But beyond that, I think that the complacency that Israel has with many years of like complete like unconditional support that Israel gets from mainstream media has, I think, it caused them to miss a step a little bit. Like you're now seeing operations being launched online. You every now and then you'll see like a pro trans black former vet Christian come out and be like, y'all not gonna do this right now with the what was it? I think Krang T. Nelson had the tweet. I gotta fucking pull it up real quick to show you. But it was like it was such a ridiculous and so obviously like a shitty ass like this shit makes like Russian attempts look brilliant in comparison. Here, this is the one I'm
Or
thinking
these
of. Watermelon
oh
ISIS
yeah,
on
watermelon
their
ISIS,
anti-blackness, Jewish hating bullshit again. Fuck these terrorist wannabes. Nail emoji, nail emoji, nail emoji. And it's just like when you look at the account, it's like Black Trans Lives at Truly Be Truly Free, Trans Pride Flag, Black Trans Pride Worldwide. Jesus is the way and the truth. veteran. I don't even know what the APRN
Yeah, what's
MSN is.
APR? Is that a nurse thing? What's
don't
hold
know.
on? What does your chat say? What's APRN MSN mean?
I have no idea. Veteran, to earn respect, you must learn respect. Joined May 2024. It's like come on. And it's
Also,
like
wait,
AI.
hold on. Go to the profile picture. Go to the that's
It's AI.
It's AI. Look, it's filled in. It looks like it's incompletely filled in.
Yeah, look at the Israeli flag shirt that she's wearing.
Also, look at how like it's like the background. It looks like you're like drunk in Tunis. It looks like.
Yeah. So I mean, this right here. Like, if this is your attempt of causing some kind of instability amongst the normal groups that are like advocates for Palestinian emancipation, like, this is a horrifyingly bad job. Like, you are not carrying out a good operation here at all, right? And there's many such examples of this. Like, and I think it comes from a place of complacency. In many respects, I think like Israel saw what happened to apartheid South Africa and learned all the lessons of what not to do, and greatly increased its operations in ensuring that America always maintain a positive attitude towards Israel. But I think they got a little too comfortable in that and didn't recognize that, like, in the new age of information with the internet, you can't really get away with all the bloodlust, no matter how hard, how hard you try.
I agree with that, and I'd also add that like something else that like definitely changed was there is like a sort of like downward linear level of like appreciation and identity that like the average like or the median American has with the state of Israel. And you could sort of think of it as like the apex was when Paul Newman starred in the movie Exodus in like the 1950s or 60s. And then, but ever since then, it's been sort of like progressively downhill as people see like Israel's true nature revealed time and time and time again. And it's obviously uneven, but and like I think there may have actually been a pro-Israel peak in the 1980s, but like broadly speaking, when we look at like now the history like through the 2020s, we see that it's this big downhill thing. And there is like you can't outrun that. Like it's coming. It was a change bound up in generations, and that was always going to make this kind of level of advocacy really difficult the next time. In fact, by the way, like Israel's committed an unprecedented slaughter, and they've committed this unprecedented slaughter at a time when like everybody has a fucking camera attached to themselves. Like there is just like this is what it means to be pro-Israel in 2024, and there was no amount of spin or nothing that like in the discourse pursuant to Israeli actions that is really could be that different, because the actions are now like it's the whole landscape's different. It's all done changed.
I'll give you a domestic example for those in the audience to understand a little bit better. I often talk about the Republican Party refusing to fucking run a normal campaign and their complete inability to do so, right? They have hugboxed themselves into believing that like everybody cares about only trans people, and they always want to think about like children's genitals, right? And that kind of trans panic and crime panic narratives actually cost them the midterm election successes that they were supposed to get under a Biden administration where Americans were experiencing negative real wage growth. Like, at that time, it should have been the Republican Party wiping the fucking table. But they got so comfortable and so insane that they put up like Doug Mastriano, for example, like a QAnon guy, as the governor of fucking Pennsylvania. They brought forward Herschel Walker. And a lot of people single out Donald Trump, but I think this is the entire Republican Party so hyper-focused on culture war narratives that they end up coming across as truly repulsive to like normal people that aren't as invested in those narratives. And I think a similar thing could be said about Israel, in the sense that like they legitimately think everybody thinks in the way that they do, all the way from the most quote unquote woke liberal Zionist down to the settler in Hebron spitting on the fucking nuns. Israeli society has been hugboxed and echo chambered into thinking that like when they say, oh, we are going to kill all their children And when like an American hits the translate from Hebrew button, they're going to look at that and go, yeah, no, they're doing the right thing. I'm on board. I'm invested. I'm just as invested in this genocidal project as you are. They don't. They think it's weird. There's also like obviously resilient underlying anti-Semitism at play here as well, both from the ultra-nationalist and pro-Israel contingency, like the evangelical Christians, who will be like, Israel must be defended because they're God's chosen sons, and also, while simultaneously in the same breath, repeat things like they have horns and tails and are the magic money people, down to...
Well, it's a classic case of like how like if there are like all these like correct Jews who are like these perfected little humans who live over there, then like, well, you know, we've got all these surplus, you know, Jews who, as Trump said, are going to be the reason he loses the election. Yeah, there's nothing that makes me feel more secure than like a really, really, really like pro-Israel guy in Kentucky who didn't meet a Jewish person until he was 28.
Yeah. But beyond that anti-Semitism, there's like a underlying, like Felix brought up this point when he was on the broadcast, and I completely agree with him. Like, let's say you fucking grew up in like Omaha, Nebraska. You've never met a Jewish person ever, but you have consistently heard the narrative in normal conversations, right? Because a lot of people do like secretly believe this shit where they're like, you know, there are a lot of wealthy Jews in media and in positions of power, and there's not a lot of Jews in general. Like when you have that underlying attitude and then you see what's going on, okay? And then you see like the entirety of Congress get up and deliver a standing ovation to Benjamin Netanyahu as he's like talking about how there are college campus terrorists out there that are backed by Hamas. Like, what are you supposed to think? You know what I mean? Like, well, this is how anti-Semitism festers and grows, like real anti-Semitism, not ADL shit that I'm talking about. Like
the old I mean, as of 10 or 15 years ago, I remember there was the Mearsheimer Waltz book, The Lobby, right? The Israel Lobby.
Yeah, that was 18 years ago.
Yeah. That was controversial. It was, you know, that's what got you really in trouble, you know, back then, was to insinuate that this was a well-organized political movement within the United States working on behalf of a country that is literally in its political committee's name. But if you start, and of course people can go overboard with that, and what they really mean is the secret lizard cabal or whatever, and we all know what we think of that. But to deny a clinical treatment that you would give the China lobby, the Cuba lobby, any other one of these organized political movements for the benefit of another country within America to make sure it continues to get support, and you try to drum that out of the like polite discourse or reasonable discourse, you try to completely bury that.
Yeah.
And then Netanyahu shows up and gets nonstop applause, and Israel gets blank checks, do whatever it wants. As you said, Hasan, people are going to actually resort to actual anti-Semitic theories and the galaxy of websites that are dealing in crackpot nonsense instead of looking at perhaps unpleasant but nasty realities in the American-Israeli relationship that are worth discussing and that can be looked at and written about and debated. And I remember it was just like you could get in real trouble back then if you even talked about AIPAC as a factor at all. I was young, but you could see it. And
Omar got yelled at by the Democratic Party as well as like the entire media apparatus for saying it's all about the Benjamins, baby. And they were like, what do you mean, Benjamin? It's a Jewish name or whatever the fuck they were saying at the time. Or they're saying, oh, you mean money Jews are puppeteering the American government? It's like, no, she's talking about fucking AIPAC. Like, it's very obvious she's talking about lobbying. Okay.
Which gives the money not because it has any effect, but because they just love politicians.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so stupid to like not realize that one, marrying Israel's actions to Judaism as a defensive posture is unironically going to cause people to look at that and go, well, I have no critical thinking skills, but these guys are saying they're doing it for Judaism, And those who are defending the guys that are saying they're doing it for Judaism are also saying you're anti-Semitic. So I guess this is something that Jews want universally. And that's why, like, you brought up the Trump anti-Semitism conference earlier. I thought it was very instructive on both what the media chose to cover from that conference and what they chose to omit. Donald Trump very clearly in that conference said, I gave you Golan Heights. You didn't even ask for it, and I gave it to you because you gave me money. And he named Sheldon and Miriam Adelson in that conference. And then he also spoke about, like, this idea that, like, again, this false notion that, like, all Jews as a monolithic force only care about Israel, because he kept repeating that. He was like, I gave you all the shit that you want. What more do you want from me? What the fuck aren't you voting for me? What's wrong with you? That was the main through line there. And if you are on a Monday defending the notion that all Jews care about Israel, you're not going to be able to cover that with the adequate tools necessary to be like, no, that's anti-Semitic. It's not just anti-Semitic when a Nazi says it. It's anti-Semitic when those who are pro-Israel are saying that as well, even if they're cynically using it as a defensive shield.
Now with the whole, I haven't followed it closely, but the slander from CNN, Dana Bash, and Jake Tapper, I think much like the Israeli, charm offensive is not what it used to be. Americans who probably, like American media figures, who probably would have gotten away with something like this not so long ago, it seems like now there is a genuine pushback that makes it to their desk where they have to weasel out of it, as I believe Bash did yesterday. She didn't issue a correction, which is the word she should have used, but she issued a clarification, I think she said, about Rashida Tlaib and her remarks that they tried to paint as anti-Semitic. And again, it wasn't so long ago that would have been the end of it, but people just aren't buying that anymore, and that's a big problem, obviously. To
It also,
everything
that
we
one was like a little bit of like a sort of like perfect storm of like they made up a lie. The guy who, like, they made up the smear about Tlaib. The guy who was the interviewer who was supposedly a part of it, like, declaimed it immediately, and they still ran with it. Like, that one was like a full, like, that was to me a sort of illustration of like how they have to bend over backwards to give it to their natural affinities in ways that they didn't. It used to be a little bit more subtle, or it was, I mean now even they I'm kind of surprised at the very least that, like, they even got an apology out of it, even from Jonathan Greenblatt. But I guess that one really was that egregious. One other thing that also strikes me with this stuff is that the, like, real anti-Semitism, to me, like, the idea of, like, people who, like, want to, like, like, who dislike Jews and dislike what they perceive to be Jewish influence and stuff, like, it does sort of strike me that there is, like, a now, like, the JD Vance stuff has also felt like a certain degree like, oh, like, well, those people now do have, like, a home as part of, like, the latent Republican Party. And so as things deteriorate in the Middle East, like, now those people have a platform and a soapbox so much to stand that they didn't before. Perfectly conveniently timed for, like, the single most anti-Semitic thing that's ever about to happen.
Yeah.
Outside of the Holocaust.
I guess the final question before we move on to the Khmer Rouge and your latest series is the question that I hear all the time and I give answers to all the time, which is, like, why is America so committed to Israel? Sorry. Like, why is America so committed to Israel? What are your opinions on it?
This is sort of what kicked off our discussion the other day on Chapo. Is you probably discussed this on your show many times. I mean, you have a period of history where America really wasn't did not have this special relationship at all. I don't know if you would disagree, Noah, but we really cemented with Kissinger and Nixon. Funnily enough, our most anti-Semitic president on record, at least.
He's like Israel's basically fate kind of hangs in the balance in the Yom Kippur War, and it really rides on whether or not America's going to rearm Israel, and Kissinger says, "Do it," and they do it, and then, and forever after, we were bound
It was a
together.
Cold War. It was a Cold War. It was like many, if not all, factors of American foreign policy at that moment. It was a Cold War maneuver, given that the Arab states were all predisposed to either live with or be friendly with the Soviet bloc. But at any rate, in 2024, my little case that I laid out with Chapo guys was that the relationship is disintegrating. Whether it'll completely fall apart, I don't know. It's of course hard to imagine that, given what we've all people of our age have grown up with. But it is disintegrating for reasons we've discussed on here today. However, America's power is waning. CENTCOM is in the Middle East. It's an incredibly important part of the big chain of military bases and the apparatus that, more than economics or political power at this point, is what keeps our machine humming as an empire. And we have to, ironically, get more and more humiliated by this ally in order to tell ourselves that it's good that we even still have an ally there in the first place, because everywhere else you look, it's slipping away. And China's doing a lot more by way of business and persuasion and out wheeling and dealing the capitalist point men in the world. So I think that the reason at this current moment why we're still so attached at the hip is actually one of desperation and ultimate confusion and incoherence, given that it's a moment of deterioration between what used to be America's lock on the Middle East and what is coming next, which is a question mark for us.
I agree with Brendan a lot on that. That like it is, sort of the incoherence, unpredictable. Like this is not a moment in which like an existing order is reasserting itself with might and vigor and revealing to us like the ley lines of the global power sphere or whatever. It's far from that. In fact, like we're seeing things kind of as to use Brendan's word, disintegrate. We're seeing things fall apart. And it's not that there is like in this bipolar world like somebody else trying to immediately fill the void. It's that things are resisting being a part of like this neat sphere of influence that we've carved out for ourselves. And it's not like which is not to say that like Gaza is aflame because they're part of the like JD Punch Chinese anti-US order or something like that, but that like all of this are these are different symptoms in their own way of like this same kind of, again, like decline, rot, the ability to unproductively manage these really core relationships that underpin the American power system around the world.
Yeah, it's no defense of Israel. Sorry, it's no defense of American statecraft or America in general to say that I don't think they share the goals that Israel that Israel has in Gaza. I think it's just a fact of the matter that they are, for their own reasons, more opposed toward rocking the boat with this fragile yet still existent allyship, however increasingly unstrategic it is, than the alternative. And that they would probably prefer this shit were over because there's an election in a month and a half, but that it's not something they're willing to risk in the long term because, as I said earlier, things are cracking up and they need to take their friends, however duplicitous, take their friends where they can find them for now.
Yeah, I think they can also trust Israel, I guess, given, I mean, in spite of all of the like counter espionage that Israel's committed against America, or even like the USS Liberty incident, like you mentioned, they still have this attitude where they feel like they can trust Israel more than they can with even like Saudi Arabia, which at times will go against America's interest with OPEC plus. They can. Israel seemingly, from their calculation, I talked about this earlier today, is like more stable as a reliable ally than even a country like Egypt, which is a client state, but a client state that still has an active, majority, almost entirely Muslim population that can sometimes overthrow their puppet leadership, the American puppet leadership. And that's like a risk that they're not willing to take, in the same way that they can have a guy who may or may not have been, I mean, definitely was Mossad, but may or may not have also been a CIA asset at a certain point, be the fucking prime minister. Like there's a level of assurance that you have with Israel at the end of the day being a willing party to American hegemonic power in the region. Because at the end of the day, what the fuck are they going to do? Are they going to go get weapons from China and Russia? Like, would that be able to carry them across any fucking finish line? Of course not.
No, we brought that up the other day too, and Felix pointed out Russia can't even take Kyiv. It's not going to be able to fill the role of America. But I do think that 50 years from now, things could look very different in Israel. You could imagine a scenario where they go full pariah and take what they can get from everybody rather than just have this uniquely profitable relationship with America, depending on the breaks. But for now, I think everyone, however suspicious they are of each other, however resentful they are of each other, they still want to preserve an antiquated, ultimately Cold War alliance that has fallen out of kind of historical meaning at this point in time.
Yeah, especially when considering like the complicated relationship that Israel has with Russia in general as well. I mean, there are a shit ton of Russian nationals that are now Israeli, some of which aren't even Jewish, but they're just Israeli. And that is the reason why, the pro-Israel, pro-Russia contingency is not exclusive to the MAGA Republicans that got duped by like a Telegram.
And also to your point about like Israel and Russia's relationship. Israel has a relationship with Ukraine as well, and there's lots of Ukrainian nationals in Israel, including, rumor has it, members of Zelensky's family. Like, I think that the idea is that Israel, in the same way that like Istanbul is considered sort of neutral ground for the wealthy and the bourgeois of both sides of like the Saudi-Iran like divide for the 2010s.
Yeah.
It's the one place in the region where you can catch a flight to like pretty much any city. I think that you could make the. Oh, sorry. Mike's coming in a bit hot. I think. I'm sorry, I forgot what the point of comparison was.
You were talking about Istanbul, and you activated my fight or flight, and
by bringing up Turkey.
By bringing up Turkey, Turkish President Erdogan. I don't approach Hamas as a terrorist organization. Turkish President Erdogan also gave a UN speech where he compared Benjamin Netanyahu to Adolf Hitler and demanded the Western powers take action as they did during World War II yesterday. Oh my woke king Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Mr. NATO.
I mean, he plays the watermelon seller plays every side of it.
Yeah,
he's playing.
Play both sides and you come out on top. Yeah, he's I mean, he has a lot of internal pressure. But this is what happens when you have allegiances with majority Muslim nations. That is like a perfect demonstration, right? You have a lot of internal pressure from your constituents that are like looking at the situation and going, what the fuck are you saying? I covered this extensively in the beginning. Early October, Recep Tayyip Erdogan was somewhat pro-Israel, as a matter of fact. A lot of the ultra-nationalist, anti-Erdogan constituencies in Turkey were also pro-Israel because of their overwhelming hatred for the Syrian refugees that now live in Israel, the ultra-nationalists, I mean. But they changed their
strategic
attitude.
Strategic alliance with the Israelis, even though you fucking hate their guts, is like a Middle Eastern pastime.
Yeah, exactly. And we train in Turkey Israeli fighter pilots, so that has never changed. So, and also the Turkish government is obviously in allegiance with Azerbaijan, which got most of their weapons from Israel when they were conducting their ethnic displacement campaign in Karabakh. And beyond that, obviously, Israeli energy flows from Azerbaijan through Turkish pipelines directly into Israel, which comprises, I think, like 40% of their entire energy grid.
Israel licenses weapons and works with everybody from Vietnam to China, two countries that also have a rivalry, by the way. Like,
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that, like, globalization, and really, like, we're talking about this sort of like historical period beginning in like 1980 or so. So for like the last 45 years, more or less, you have had a period by which everything got like more interconnected. There's still conflict, yes, but like the economic ties that bind a lot of these countries have made open conflict that much harder. And people who could be isolated and removed from it and picked off by sanctions regimes like Saddam Hussein, or obviously attempts on Cuba and North Korea, they'll try that. But in general, like, it is a very difficult thing to do. And that's, it's a testament to Israel's unique the unique crazy, like, death cult, like, mania that they're gripped by at this moment, that they're kind of, like, they're speed running the demolition of all that. They're removing all of the complexity that has protected them for the last 44 years on top of the strategic assurances given by the US, and they're just dynamiting it with, like this, like really radically, crazy, like even by their standards, like the most violence that they have dealt probably in half a century. We are now talking about over the course of a year. Historically
Again,
significant shit.
and they've lost. I just sent Noah this clip before we went on. They've lost their ability ultimately to um to deal out this type of violence while preserving somehow a respectable sheen on the international stage, at least among the nations that it matters to them. There was an interview. I don't know who the guy was. He was some Israeli government spokesman who was being interviewed by some British journalist, and the journalist just said, "What gives Israel the justification to have nukes and not Iran, especially in this day and age?" And the guy just said, like, "Well, I find the question offensive." And the journalist was like, "Well, I'm still going to ask it." And the guy was clearly just terrified and confused as to how the interview had been allowed to proceed to this moment. And he said, "Well, I mean, and he said, we have the right to nukes. We already survived, a Holocaust." And the British journalist just said, "So you're saying that the reason you deserve nukes is because the Holocaust happened?" And he says, "This interview's over." And he got up to walk out. And it's just, you could at one point probably have expected that to work. And now, I'm not saying the media doesn't run different sections, depending on, what country, what media organization. There's a lot of interference still being run for Israel, but not as much. And it makes a big difference. And I think that in and of itself is a sign of where things are going.
Yeah. I mean, they can't maintain this posture as though they are a moral nation and a democracy when, like, even the international organs of justice are all screaming bloody murder. Like, yes, these are feckless institutions, but they play a very important role in maintaining American soft power around the globe.
Mhm.
Your calls to action against Russia ring hollow if you are packaging that immediately in the same fucking time frame as, like, your unconditional defense and loyalty to Israel. It just doesn't work. And if your soft power doesn't work, and this is another point I brought up yesterday, your hard power capabilities diminish, because all of a sudden now, if you don't have soft power, your 800 military bases around the world in 80 nations is now a military occupation. It's no longer a military alliance and partnership agreement. It all of a sudden can very quickly turn into a military occupation in 800 military bases around the world. You cannot defend that with a militant posture. And the more people feel like there is another counterbalance out there, another superpower out there that they can lean on, like China, the more they will take action against American dominance of this sort. And I think that there are plenty who see this in the State Department, and that is probably the reason why, not because they give a shit about Palestinians. Like the guy the guy who quit the State Department early on was the one who was in charge of like signing off on weapons transfers. Like that person has been directly responsible for the death and destruction of so many Muslim children. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think he gives a fuck. I don't think it's like his appetite for dead Iraqi children and dead Muslim children, dead Arab children was you know, seethed enough that he was like, okay, enough is enough. We got to stop. I think it was more so in the interest of self-preservation that he was openly declaring America's suicide pact with Israel to be problematic.
Not unlike why in the Vietnam War you had people who supported it for a while, who thought it was strategic for a while, but in the mostly Eastern establishment, pro-NATO, pro-Europe type crowd, you had a flight from that war, the support of that war, because they eventually just thought it's not worth it, and we're now suffering in the places that matter because of it. And that's again back to the Yankee cowboy dichotomy is, the management of the status quo is ultimately to them. And this guy that resigned as, weapons czar or whatever he was, the status management of a good status quo was more important to him than frontierism with all these risks of chaos. And it's not humanitarian in its nature, but it is the sign that the most extreme elements that still have America's ear and clearly, have measures of influence might be up against something going forward, maybe.